What is the true price of a secret? Not a personal secret, a lie told to a lover or a friend, but a state secret. A truth so dangerous, so world-shattering, that an entire government decides it must be buried alive. In 1964, in Manchester, they found the bodies. 3 skeletons under an old mill. The official story was a tragic, wartime accident. A cover-up. But that was the comforting lie. The truth was a key that unlocked a door no one was ever meant to open. And the man who turned that key, Detective Inspector Leonard Havers, learned the hardest lesson of all. Some secrets aren't just meant to stay hidden. They are meant to defend themselves. When we last left this story, it ended with a disappearance. Havers had vanished from a Piccadilly station car park. His case files were gone. The official report stated he had taken early retirement due to ill health. It was a neat, quiet end, written by the very people who needed his questions to stop. But the past is not a patient that can be retired. It is a patient, vengeful predator. And in the winter of 1966, 2 years after the first bone was unearthed, it decided to hunt again. It began not with a detective's hunch, but with a flood. A water main feeding the newly built Winston Court Council estate. The proud, concrete future erected upon the grave of Whitworth Mill, ruptured with the sound of cannon shot. The torrent of water tore a jagged, greedy sinkhole in the tarmac of the central courtyard, a dark maw that swallowed light and hope. As workmen gathered at the edge, their torch beams cutting feeble sways through the rising steam, one light did not dance over broken pipes. It fixed instead on a gleam of something alien and man-made, nestled in the raw, exposed clay far below the foundation pilings. It was another drum, identical to the one Havers had discovered. Its metal was scarred by time and pressure, but the faded government seal was still visible, a stark, official brand on a piece of forgotten nightmare. The police were called, but this time they were not the first to arrive. Men in unmarked, dark rovers and serious, charcoal overcoats were on the scene before the local bobbies could even string their tape. They moved with a quiet, terrifying efficiency that spoke of long practice in making problems disappear. They took possession of the drum, the site, and every witness statement. The official report filed later would list the incident as a subsidence-related utility inspection, a non-event, a bureaucratic sigh. Yet, one image escaped the lockdown. A young, idealistic constable, whose own father had worked the looms at Whitworth Mill, felt the weight of history. He used his personal camera, a simple Kodak Instamatic, and took a single, surreptitious photograph. It shows the drum, a monstrous, muddy tooth being winched from the pit by the silent, efficient men in their dark coats. And there, in the background, almost lost in the wet, clinging shadows, a second object is visible. The splintered corner of a rotten wooden crate, spilling out its contents. Not bones, but what appear to be files, their paper fused by decades of damp into a single, moss-covered brick of lost information. The message was terrifyingly clear. The past was not just preserving bodies. It was preserving its own records, its own confession. This is the story of what was written on those waterlogged pages. This is the final, dreadful truth behind Project Citron, the ultimate fate of Leonard Havers, and a horrifying answer to the question etched like a scar into Samuel Day's journal. Asterisk, the vat isn't for dye. It's for preservation. Asterisk, our guide through this final, lightless descent is not a detective. She is an archaeologist of silence. Her name is Dr. Alara Vance, a historian seconded to the Public Record Office, a woman whose life was spent piecing together narratives from the fragments the world intentionally left behind. In 1991, during the mandated declassification review of a batch of mundane home office files from the 1940s, she found an anomaly. A single, thin folder misfiled among reports on potato yields and livestock subsidies. Its cover was blank, but for a handwritten code in faded ink, C7/42. Inside were not minutes or memos, but a collection of heartbreakingly personal effects. A tram ticket from Gorton to the city center, a child's crayon drawing of a smoking factory chimney, a recipe for parking clipped from a newspaper, and a faded, square photograph of three people, two women and a man, arms linked, smiling with a nervous, hopeful energy outside the wrought iron gates of Whitworth Dye & Sons. On the back, in a delicate, feminine script, were the names: Asterisk Eleanor, Nora, Sam. May 41 star. Dr. Vance was a connoisseur of ghosts. She felt their presence in these forgotten, intimate artifacts. This was not a civil service file. It was a reliquary. Her subsequent dogged research, a historian's version of a forensic investigation, led her down a rabbit hole that terminated at the sealed, cross-referenced records of the Havers case. The connection was the photograph. These were the same three souls he had sought, the ones whose skeletons had been pulled from the earth. Using a combination of academic privilege, sheer, unyielding stubbornness, and discreet calls to contacts in a newly transparent, post-Cold War government, she managed to have the Havers file and the related Project Citron dossiers temporarily released for historical review. What she assembled from those fragments of official silence, from the redacted lines and the cold clinical memos, is the story we can now finally tell. A story that reveals Project Citron was not a cover-up. It was a covenant with something unspeakable. Project Citron was never about fabric. That was the elegant, plausible lie woven for the factory workers, the foremen, and the lower-level bureaucrats. The fabric, the dyes, the chemical treatments, they were a side effect, a convenient byproduct to mask the real research. The true purpose of Citron, conceived in the paranoid, desperate winter of 1941, was far more audacious and infinitely more monstrous. It was an attempt to cheat death itself, not through medicine, but through chemistry, to build an ark for the human soul. The brainchild was Sir Alastair Finch, a brilliant, immoral Oxford physiologist whose ambition had long since cauterized his conscience. Citron was based on a radical and heretical theory, one ridiculed by his peers, but whispered about in the darkest corners of intelligence circles. Finch postulated that consciousness was not an ethereal soul, but a complex, unique electrochemical signature, a pattern that could, under specific traumatic conditions, be recorded and preserved. He believed the moment of death was not an end, but a critical, fleeting juncture where this pattern destabilized and dissolved back into the void. His goal was to find a way to arrest that process, to capture the human pattern at the point of catastrophic failure and hold it in a state of indefinite stasis, to create a library of the dying. The medium for this preservation was not a machine, but a chemical broth, a viscous, amber-hued solution he called Orifix. It was based on a stabilized, high-concentration mercury compound, laced with exotic catalytic agents and neural stabilizers derived from toxic fungi. The vat Samuel Day wrote of with such dread was not for dyeing cloth. It was a prototype biocontainment unit, a baptismal font for a new, terrible kind of life. The fabric was merely the initial test subject, a way to see if the compound could impregnate and preserve a complex organic structure without visible decay. The workers, including Eleanor, Nora, and Sam, were the unwilling and initially unknowing laboratory technicians, mixing the very solution that would later claim them. But they were not fools. They were working-class men and women with sharp eyes and a deep, intuitive understanding of their environment. They grew suspicious. They saw the strange, sustained, internal bubbling in the central, off-limits vat when it was supposedly empty and cold. They handled the new formula that burned their hands and left a coppery, metallic taste at the back of their throats. They noticed the small, secretive team of Finch's own researchers, men who never smiled, who worked in a sealed-off section of the mill behind a door that required a key they did not possess. Eleanor Briggs, the one the foreman had called nosy, began asking pointed questions in the canteen. Nora Fielding, the vibrant dancer, confessed to Sam that she felt a pervasive, chilling sense of being watched, even in the crowded weaving room. Samuel Day, the thinker, the quiet man, kept his journal, meticulously recording the anomalies, the strange, unmarked deliveries under cover of darkness, the whispered, heated arguments he overheard between Finch and the government liaison. Their fate was sealed on the night of April 4th, 1942. According to a damning and signed addendum later found tucked into Finch's own personal log, the three of them had staged their own investigation. They had hidden in a storage closet after their shift, waiting for the silence to fall. What they witnessed was a terminal transfer procedure. The subject was a terminally ill cancer patient from a nearby municipal hospital, a man named Arthur Pym, who had been smuggled into the mill under the guise of being a new night watchman. The procedure was a catastrophic failure. Pym's body, upon immersion, did not enter stasis. It went into violent, uncontrollable seizures, his limbs thrashing against the restraints before falling still. Finch's log coldly notes the unfortunate necessity of a physical termination to preserve absolute project integrity. They had not witnessed an experiment. They had witnessed a murder. Eleanor, Nora, and Sam had seen the true, hideous face of Citron. They could not be allowed to leave the mill alive. The project's security chief, a former military policeman named Crozier, a man with eyes like chipped flint, intercepted them. The skull fractures noted in the 1964 pathology report, the bound wrists and ankles. These were not the results of a chemical accident or a building collapse. They were the deliberate, brutal marks of a silencing. They were killed to protect the most sensitive, blasphemous secret of the war, one that made the nascent atomic bomb seem almost conventional by comparison. Their bodies were buried in the one place no one would think to look, beneath their own workplace, in the soft, yielding earth of the mill's subbasement, a place that was then sealed under a hurriedly poured, unrecorded concrete slab. But this is where the story twists into its final, most grotesque configuration, where the mundane evil of a cover-up collides with a scientific abomination. Sir Alistair Finch, the ultimate pragmatist, saw their deaths not just as a security necessity, but as an unparalleled opportunity. They were fresh, healthy subjects, their neural patterns presumably vibrant and intact. In a move that bordered on the necromantic, he ordered their bodies subjected to the citron process. They were not buried immediately. They were immersed in the preservation broth, becoming unwilling pioneers in the experiment that had killed them. And here, Dr. Vance's research uncovered the project's most chilling, quasi-successful finding. The citron solution, the Orifix, did work after a fashion. It halted cellular decay perfectly, creating the waxy, lifelike preservation that so horrified Havers. But it did something else, something Finch had not fully anticipated and could never truly control. It didn't just preserve the body. It acted as a kind of chemical phonograph cylinder, capturing the final, intense electrochemical storm of the brain at the moment of death, the terror, the pain, the final, desperate neural firings. The phosphorescence of unknown origin that so unsettled the 1964 pathologist was a faint, lingering echo of this captured energy, a ghost in the machine. The residue on the bones was the desiccated remains of the Orifix itself, a crystalline shell holding a frozen scream. The three workers were buried only after Finch deemed the pattern capture phase complete. The woman in the drum, the one Havers found, listed in the files as Asset Gamma, was another subject entirely. Her identity remains redacted, but the context suggests she was a high-level foreign agent, captured and mortally wounded. Citron was used on her as the ultimate form of interrogation, a brutal attempt to chemically red the secrets and identities locked in her dying mind. She was the project's most prized specimen, kept separate, preserved in her amber tomb for post-war analysis that never came. She was the truth Havers stumbled upon, that the project had long since shifted from theoretical preservation to active, brutal experimentation on living and then dying human subjects. So what of Detective Inspector Leonard Havers? The man who sought truth above all? His ultimate fate is detailed not in a police file, but in a cold clinical memo from the security service. He had become, in their precise terminology, a persistent, high-value contamination risk. His discovery of Asset Gamma proved he was not just close, he was inside. He was not murdered in a ditch. He was, in their view, recruited. He was apprehended by Crozier, the same security chief from 1942, now a senior, feared figure in domestic intelligence, and subjected to a choice that was no choice at all: disappear voluntarily into the secret world and use his formidable dog skills for them, or face public ruin, the guaranteed and immediate loss of his career and pension, with a very clear, unspoken implication that his wife's safety and sanity could not be guaranteed. The man in the bowler hat had been his watcher, his evaluator. The late-night calls, the disturbed files, these were not mere threats, but calibrated tests designed to gauge his resilience, his paranoia, his ultimate breaking point. The photograph of him, reflected in the glass of Asset Gamma's jar, was his final initiation, a way to implicate him irrevocably, to show him the abyss he was now compelled to call home. Property Room 7 was not a physical location, it was a designation. It was the code name for the ongoing, post-war analysis of the Citron data, a project that had been moved from the ruined mill to a secluded, secure country house in the Cotswolds. Havers, the man who sought the truth, was made its chief of security, a gilded prisoner of the very mystery he had tried to solve. He became a ghost, his name erased, his past surgically severed. He lived out his days, according to a single, sparse line in a personnel file, guarding the terrible secret he had once hunted, a final, crushing irony that the files note he accepted with stoic, understanding resignation. He died of a heart attack in 1978. There was no obituary. Project Citron was officially terminated in 1947. The science was too unstable, the ethical abyss too deep, even for the hardened pragmatists of the new Cold War. The records were sealed with a classification level reserved for national catastrophes. The specimens, including the remains of Asset Gamma, were supposed to have been incinerated in a special high-temperature furnace. The discovery of the second drum in 1966 proved that this order, like so many others, had not been fully carried out. The estate at Winston Court, it seems, was not just built over a grave. It was built over a forgotten, poorly sealed warehouse of horrors. Dr. Alara Vance completed her comprehensive 200-page report in 1992. She recommended the full, immediate declassification of the Citron and Havers files, arguing that the historical and ethical value far outweighed any antiquated security concerns. Her recommendation was denied without comment. Her own report was classified for 75 years. She died in 2008, a forgotten keeper of a forbidden history, never knowing if the full, awful story would be told in her lifetime. The council flats at Winston Court still stand. People live their lives there. Children play in that courtyard, completely unaware of the preserved patterns of terror and pain that may still linger in the earth beneath their homes, or in the sealed, silent archives of a government that decided some truths were too dangerous, too blasphemous for the living to ever know. The story of the Whitworth Mill is a stark, enduring testament to the fact that the most terrifying things we bury are not bodies, but ideas. Ideas about the value of a single, human life when weighed against the monstrous ambitions of science and the cold, absolute logic of the state. The bodies were exhumed by time, but the full, chilling truth of why they were buried, of what was done to them, remains, even now, only partially unearthed. A silent, preserved specimen of human sin, waiting in the dark for its final, absolute release. This has been Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more journeys into the darkness, where the past is never truly past, and the truth is the most dangerous ghost of all.